I want to welcome everyone here this morning for coming here today and reiterate a warm welcome to the kickoff of the program for both our in-person and virtual attendees. I'm Emily Garner, Senior Manager of Campus and Public Programs at the List Visual Arts Center and lead organizer of this year's Wasserman Forum, Altered Access. I'm a 5'1" short white female with mid-length blonde hair, with dark-rimmed glasses and lavender tops, and wearing a black cowl neck and black blazer. We kicked off the program yesterday afternoon, setting the tone for this year's Wasserman Forum, Altered Access with Building What Doesn't Harm by Emily Barker, and Keynote Address by Park MacArthur, which included a beautiful video work entitled Day. If you missed these presentations, we will have them recorded versions up on our website in about a week, but otherwise they can still be accessed through our webcast link until we get them posted. I want to continue in expressing our gratitude for additional members of our Wasserman Forum team, including the Art, Culture, and Technology program, which has allowed us to use the space for the physical location of this program. Thank you to Debbie Arment, Jasmine Velasco, and Kim Enos for joining us this weekend as the live ASL interpreters during the course of this forum. Thank you to members of the MIT Audiovisual Department and MIT Video Productions in creating the webcast of this event and to enable the virtual attendance of this event and connecting to our live transcribers. And also Vanessa Sun, graduate student who has provided the air purifiers and CR2 boxes to assist in the clean air in this conference space, as well as outside. Thank you to my colleagues in the List Center for their support of this program, and most grateful for my program partner at the List Center, Elizabeth Ponce, who will provide introductions to our discussions later today. I want to recognize the difficulty that many of our panelists, moderators, and attendees had to overcome to be with us here in person for this forum. I want to thank everyone for coming here to share their thoughts, their stories, their expertise, their support, and most of all for making this event worth attending. The content shared during this forum can be emotional and difficult to listen to and talk about, but the purpose of this forum is to consider where we are at this point of time in regards to disability practice in the arts and inspire creative thoughtfulness to all of our work in human engagements. This morning, we will begin today's program with a panel entitled To Build. What's built is a product of human decision-making. It carries tacit ideas about normativity, dependence, and lives worth living. At the same time, disability culture has always been at the forefront of building and rebuilding, both in the margins and in the mainstream. This panel includes 3 creative practitioners whose work embodies speculative, friction-ful, playful, and critical dialogue with the built world. We will hear presentations from Carmen Papaya, Naomi Lockmeyer, and Finnegan Shannon, followed by a moderated discussion by Sarah Hendren, and then followed by a brief Q&A. Carmen Papaya was born in 1981 as a non-visual social practice artist with chronic and episodic pain. He uses organizing strategies and improvisation to address his access to public space, art, institutions, and visual culture. As a convener, he establishes welcoming spaces where disabled, sick, and chronically ill people can build capacity for care that they lack on account of governmental failure and medical ableism. His work, which takes forms ranging from collaborative, performative, to public intervention, is a response to the harms of the medical model of disability. Papaya holds a Bachelor of Arts from Simon Fraser University and a Master of Fine Arts with a focus in art and social practice from Portland State University. He is the inaugural fellow of the Cryptech Incubator via Leonardo, the International Society for the Arts, Sciences, and Technology. In 2020, Papaya was one of the 25 artists who received the Sobey Art Award. In 2019, he was a Sobey Long List recipient in the West Coast Yukon region. His work has been featured at institutions such as the Guggenheim Museum, the Whitney Museum of American Art, Tate Liverpool, Banff Center for Arts and Creativity, the Contemporary Art Gallery, Surrey Art Gallery, and Gallery Gachet. Naomi Lockmeyer is an Austrian-born live performance artist living and working in East London. They have performed and exhibited widely in the UK and internationally. As a queer disabled person and immigrant to the UK, identity and how we relate to ourselves and others in the world in an embodied way are core interests in their site and context responsive practice. They are also an existential phenomenological psychotherapist with a particular interest in the minority experience, gender, sexuality, disability, identity, intersectionality, and trauma. Finnegan Shannon is an artist who experiments with forms of access that intervene in ableist structures with humor, earnestness, and rage. Some of their recent work includes Anti-Stairs Club Lounge, an ongoing project that gathers people together who share an aversion to stairs. Alt Text is Poetry, a collaboration with Bojana Koklat that explores the expressive potential of image description. And I have to say that it's a wonderful workshop that she was able to lead for both members of the MIT List Visual Arts Center to kick off our alt text on the website, as well as to members of MIT to start exploring what that can mean and the subjective capacities and creative capacities that alt text can take. And Do You Want Us Here or Not? A series of benches and cushions designed for exhibition spaces. They have done projects with the Queens Museum, New York, the High Line, New York, Museum for Modern Kunst in Frankfurt, MCA Denver, MoCA Cleveland, and Nuke Gallery, Oakland. Their work has been supported by a Win Newhouse Award, an I-Beam Fellowship, and grants from Art Matters Foundation and Canada Council for the Arts. They live and work in Brooklyn, New York. As you can see, there's a long list of accolades that these artists have done, and they're very short. And so Sarah Hendren has the challenge to moderate these three individuals and creative thinkers as a humanist in tech, an artist, design researcher, writer, and professor at Olin College of Engineering in Needham, Massachusetts. Her book, What Can a Body Do? How We Meet the Built World, explores the places where disability shows up in design at all scales, assistive technology, furniture, architecture, urban planning, and more. It is named one of the best books of 2020 by NPR, and I would agree with that, and won the 2021 Science and Society Journalism Book Prize. Her art and design works have been exhibited in museums worldwide and are held in permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art, New York, in Cooper Hewitt, New York. And in 2021 and 22, she was a lecturer in architecture at Harvard Graduate School of Design and a fellow in education policy at the New America think tank, where she was researching the future of work for adults with cognitive and developmental disabilities. So let us collectively consider innovative approaches that implement accessible, inclusive practices, which every organizational and institutional model can apply in developing a fresh look at how disabled artists, audiences, and museums can work together. So with that, I'd like to turn over the panel over to Shannon, who will share her work first.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I'm going to start with a self-description that I wrote it down because I always get a little flustered and forget something for this part. I'm a white person in my 30s. I'm ambulatory and move with a wobble. Gender-wise, I try to exude a sort of boyish charm, and I'm feeling nervous and alert and tired and happy to be part of this all swirled together. I'm going to just talk about a couple of projects today that I think, relate specifically to this idea of building or built environments. The first is this project called Do You Want Us Here or Not? That's a series of mostly benches, but also chairs, chaise lounges, other furniture objects, cushions. On the screen is a bright blue bench in a yellow room that has white hand-lettered text kind of filling the back and seat of the bench that says, "I'd like more time with this artwork, but all this standing is painful. Sit if you agree." And this work really comes from an access desire of my own and the experience of going to museum spaces in New York City and feeling like a real scarcity around the bench and seating placement. And as I was starting to do research about that, what I was learning is that it's often curatorial choices that dictate the seating options. And so I realized that by making artwork that is functional as seating, it's a way of kind of shoehorning in some seating where there might not have been otherwise. And I think that's often a theme that comes up in my work is like, what is possible through an art project that wouldn't necessarily be possible in another context or under other conditions. The next project that I'm going to talk about is called The only thing I like about stairs is that they can serve as a place to sit in a pinch. It's a site-specific installation for a series of small balconies at a museum in Germany. There are 6 steps going up to this kind of tiny personal balcony that overlook the main hall of the museum. So it's kind of, my guess is that the architect kind of intended it as like a vista sort of experience, but I am very anti-stairs, and I always bristle at experiences that are only for people who want to or can use the stairs. And so I made a series of cushions that cover the bottom 3 steps of this tiny stairway to the balcony that kind of like flip it and make it less functional as a stairway and a kind of route of travel, and more functional as a place to pause and sit. And there's also a metal grab bar to the side of the little cushioned stairwell seat that helps me at least get up and down from sitting. And I think, again, like very influenced by just kind of my day-to-day life of moving through New York City and there not being a lot of seating, and so often pausing at stoops or other kind of more improvised seating options. This is a really recent project, and the image I have is from, the work is actually like taped up in this photo because it's from install. I don't have the final documentation, but the image shows an orange chain that's blocking a stairwell with a sign in my handwriting that says, "If you would like to use the stairs, request access from gallery staff. Elevators are available for use." This project was for a 2-level gallery space called Flag Foundation. It's on the 9th and 10th floor and has an elevator that goes to both levels, but their typical protocol is that they lock the elevator to the 10th floor and unlock it by request. And so this project is called An Inside Joke Between Me and Everyone Who's Ever Had to Make an Access Request, and is just about trying to, kind of flip the priority mode of moving through that space. The stairwell is blocked off on both levels, and I asked them to have the elevator unlocked to both levels, at least for the duration of this exhibition. And then the last project I wanted to talk about is, sometimes I think it's fun with talks to talk about things that are more in progress. And so this is an exhibition that I'm in the midst of working on right now. I've always had this like fantasy of being able to go into a gallery, and instead of having for me to move from artwork to artwork, that instead I could just like come in and sit somewhere comfortable and have the artwork come around to me. And so I'm working on a project in Cleveland that will be an exhibition that's basically centered on a conveyor belt. So I have an image of a very early kind of like concept sketch that I made. It's pretty, it's colored pencil. The perspective and stuff is very wacky because I'm not that good at that. But it's, some like couches and it was trying to draw really like comfy kind of armchair type things. One of the couches has a floral pattern on it, and they're kind of organized around this circular structure that's at table height that has a series of objects on little trays that move around the conveyor belt. That basically in the space, it will actually be a lot longer, and it will be 25 feet, and there will be, objects from other artists that are on the conveyor belt that move around the space. And you have the option to either kind of like experience the project as like a parade of objects and just kind of like have them flow past you, or all the things in the show will be things that you can pick up and touch. So you can also take things off the conveyor belt and spend time with them and touch and hold them, and then put them back. And yeah, this project is called Don't Mind If I Do, and feels like a really kind of fun and joyful experiment for me in terms of, imagining this kind of weird and wacky structure that I've been dreaming about. So that's it for me. Carmen, I'm going to pass you the clicker.
Thank you. Do I have to click it for my first image?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's Carmen speaking. I'm going to start with a really quick description. I'm I'm white with an olive complexion. I have black hair, a beard covered by a mask. I'm wearing a green wool cap, blue button shirt and pants, and this gray wool jacket over that. I also am carrying some pain today. I usually say it when I'm usually having pain. I don't usually say the name for my conditions, but here I feel comfortable saying that I have sickle cell, and I just have a lot of like back pain right now, which affects my processing and my info recall sometimes. So I'm just going to be gentle with myself, and I think that's it for a description from me. I'm visiting from the stolen land of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Stolo people, where I was born and live as an uninvited guest. I live on land that's colonially known as East Vancouver in the Hastings Sunrise neighborhood. I'm going to talk about a project called Provisional Structures today. It's a project where, well, I guess in 2020, I started using solo show opportunities to invite other guest artists into a show that I curate, I grant write for, and then I support the artist in project development for the show. I also make a work for the show, and it's usually a large-scale installation that serves as like a gathering place or a space for dialogue within the context of the show. I'm going to show this. I'm going to start by showing provisional structure 1.
Oh, that actually is a slide that just says your name.
Oh, okay, that's me. Yeah. So, and this is from the first like exhibition of provisional structures in 2021. It's a collaboration with Michael Leese of A Good Weather Studio in Vancouver. We have a dialogue-based practice or process where we discuss the space we have access to, and then discuss the concept for the work and any opportunities to intervene in the existing space. And Michael, uses those conversations to develop like design drawings, and he describes those to me, and he makes scale models for me that are tactile. And as we kind of refine our concept for fabrication, we kind of go through this kind of process. And we started making, I started collaborating with Michael in 2018, and that was when I started making this large-scale installation work. And the image that's on screen right now is from Provisional Structures at the Mackenzie Art Gallery, which is on Treaty 4 territory in Saskatchewan. On screen, is, like you can, depicted is Nicole Nugent, who is the curator of education at the Mackenzie Art Gallery, who is seated with a gallery attendant named Dave, who's using a wheelchair. And they're underneath this large acoustical dome that's looming above. It's kind of skeletal. It's made of cardboard. It's focusing the acoustic space in the gathering area at Provisional Structure 1. And both Nicole, Nicole was my main point person and support as I developed the first exhibition for provisional structures. And Nicole's seated on sandbags, which are referencing disaster relief. Each of the sandbags has the words open access on them, stenciled onto them. And I made this work while Vancouver was going through floods that were displacing a lot of people, including some disabled activist friends who support disabled drug users and unhoused folks. So this gathering area, I guess what's not visible here is being projected from the center of that dome. It actually has sound dampening panels inside of it. They're black, and being projected from the center is this audio. It's a keynote address from a 2020 conference called As We Are, Disability Justice and Community Care, which was organized by the Portland Disability Justice Collective and a friend, Rebel Fayola Rose. And the talk that I included here was by an artist named Vo, that's V-O-V-O. And Vo is a multidisciplinary, socially engaged artist who makes work about the various intersections and impacts of trauma. And their talk just discussed trauma-informed care through the lens of disability justice. And I really connected with it at a deep level on account of my own experience of childhood medical trauma. And I asked them if I could include it as a centerpiece to my installation. Surrounding Nicole and Dave are 13 freestanding mirrors. And they go up to be, I don't know, maybe 10 feet tall. They're being supported by a simple wooden frame and a sandbag. I'm just going to go to my next image. This is provisional structures at the Vancouver Art Gallery, and this is the entrance into the show. There's artwork on either side and towards the back wall there. And the main focal point in this image is what looks like a tent hanging from the ceiling, and it's sagging from the force of gravity. In fact, this is a parachute. It's one in a series that me and a collaborator, Heather Smith, made after our show at the Banff Center in 2019. This parachute, it says, it has a statement, open access is a temporary, collectively held space. It's sewn on in black sans serif lettering. Yeah, this is one of the works that I made for the show. And I'm only going to be able to talk about the work that I made for the show here, but my other contributors for this show were Sharona Franklin, Grant Miller, and Jonathan Lee of the Curiosity Paradox, Rebel Fayola Rose, and then Heather Smith, as well as I'll talk about some other activists and folks too that contributed to the show. And yeah, I'm just gonna go to the next image here. So, and I guess I have like a little content notice. I'm gonna be talking about medical assisted death. And so in 2021, me and friend Aslan Thomas, who's an artist in Cape Breton, gave a presentation as part of the disability filibuster against Bill C-7. This is the Medical Assistance in Dying Act. And me and Aslan, we talked about medical and cultural ableism and Mia Mingus's concept of access intimacy. And if you're not familiar with Bill C-7, it was passed by royal assent on March 17th, 2021. And it actually broadened eligibility to medical assisted death for people with a disability diagnosis for whom death was not imminent. So this means that people with disabilities in Canada can more easily apply for and get medical assisted death than the affordable housing that they need, the various access supports that they need, and meaningful and accessible employment. So this installation, I think that I've here is provisional structure 2, and it was meant as a space and viewing area for over 40 hours of live stream content from the disability filibuster against Bill C-7. this structure builds on the concept and design of provisional structure 1. In what the dome that I described in provisional structure 1 here has become an over 20-foot tall structure, a tented structure made out of sound dampening panels, and they're being supported by these wooden supports, 11 towering structures on the outside. I'm just going to show you an interior shot here. I designed the space after my own experience during the filibuster. I usually would sign on in the evenings, and I would listen to sessions while on my heating pad with a weighted blanket on. So, the space privileges sound as a main entry point to the content, but it also includes a video with the content with its original ASL and captioning from the events. Again, there's over 40 hours of live stream content presented here, selected by a filibuster presenter named Kaylee Hubick, and it counts for all the open hours of the Vancouver Art Gallery. And the filibuster was organized by Gabrielle Peters, who's a Vancouver-based policy analyst and writer, and Catherine Frazee, who's an activist and disability scholar in Ontario, and countless co-conspirators. It was really, I think, a milestone in the contemporary disability movement. It allowed a lot of us to find each other and know what was going on in terms of activism and advocacy across the country. It also served as a platform for disability activist histories, for people to highlight those, such as deinstitutionalization, and so on. And so there was around-the-clock kind of program of presentations, comedic and dramatic performances, and just late-night conversations where people were holding space for grief and fear. I guess one thing I'd like to highlight here is at the center of the room, there is a sandbag and the string from 6 black foil balloons is moored to it. And the balloons are floating out of the oculus at the top of this structure. And these 6 balloons are meant to reference and represent the daily number of BC residents who die of overdose. And they're at the center of this space because during the filibuster, a local Vancouver drug user activist, Garth Mullins, was invited to the filibuster stage to kind of talk about his work organizing with other drug users in Vancouver, and really got to think, consider for the first time his work as a form of disability justice. So harm reduction being something that was is relevant when we talk about accessibility. This is something Gabrielle also has written about. So I included 6 balloons representing the daily number of BC residents who die of overdose here, and it corresponds to an installation in the windows at the Vancouver Art Gallery, where there's an additional 840 balloons, which are representing the number of BC residents who are expected to die of overdose over the course of the exhibition, which ran from December to April. And I guess one thing that I'd like to mention, do I have a minute? One thing that I'd like to mention that's not visible in these images is, well, I'll first say that the Vancouver Art Gallery, whenever I'm touring this work, I mention that the Vancouver Art Gallery served as a former courthouse building. The balloons are kind of crowded and they're a bit tangly and circulate from, are slightly animated due to air circulation. One thing that I included in the space, though, that I'd like to mention is it's not depicted here, but it's a golden evil eye amulet, and I've taken to including an evil eye in provisional structures as a reference to my great grandma on my mother's side, who lived in Turkey and then Greece, and she was a mystic who served her community by helping to lift hexes and curses through spell and ritual. And she was a believer in the evil eye as a protective measure. So when I was born, me and my siblings, actually, we had an evil eye pinned to our pillow as like a protection from evil. And I've taken to including them in provisional structures for that same reason. It's like maybe a deterrent from ableism. And that's my talk. Thank you.
Hi, I'm very excited to be here. I'm Naomi Lackmeyer. I'm just going to move this forward too. There we go. In terms of self-description, I'm a short, slightly dumpy, white person with grayish salt and pepper hair piled on my head. I'm wearing a red and black knitted tunic and some beads, black beads around my neck and in my ears. So there has actually been, well, let's start with, this is the image that I wanted to start you off with today in my full intention to give just a little portfolio talk, talking you through my work and how it has become this work that juxtaposes and questions how my specific embodied being in the world interacts with space objects and other people, and how this has very much led to a practice of interchange, both in a communicative sense and in the sense of power exchange and exchange of control. And this piece that you're seeing on the screen right now, it's called Exercising Losing Control. It is the first performance object that I made. It is me with shorter, darker hair than now, also wearing glasses, and only my hands and my head are sticking out of this yellow ball, which is essentially imitating a Weeble, like the 1970s kid's toy that you can poke and then it wobbles and they don't fall down. And in essence, this sculpture functioned the same. So the image you're seeing now is in an exhibition space with another human being looking at me, and people were invited to kick me and punch me and wobble me around. And I could essentially not do anything about it other than be wobbled around. And I mean, this was a real departure for me, and me starting to question why it was so important to me to put myself into, very deliberately put myself into positions of not being in control and playing with that. And that has really continued for, this piece is probably about 15 or 17 years ago, and this has progressed and developed. And this is where I'm going to diverge a bit from what I had planned, because I thought I'll just go from here and give you a nice portfolio talk and about how my work has developed. But then I arrived in Boston, and something happened about just over 24 hours ago. One of my means of moving around the world and experiencing the world, as much as this is environmentally problematic, is driving. I love driving. I have a car in London. When I go somewhere, I rent cars. And I'm very used to booking with a company that I'm not going to name, I guess, that have done me very well all over the world, especially in North America, for years. And I felt very safe with booking through them. And I think there is something about the power and control aspect that it always feels a little bit like you're living on tectonic plates that are, like an earthquake could happen anytime. But if there hasn't been an earthquake for a while, I kind of go, well, there's probably not going to be an earthquake. So I'll just be okay, and I'll go to my rental car place and rent a car, and there won't be an earthquake. Well, so we got there late on Thursday night and presented them my booking papers. It's like, no, there's no hand-controlled car booked for you. I won't bore you with the hour and a half that ensued from there of being told that I had done everything wrong in the booking, that, you know, if only I'd sent an email, well, then it wouldn't be a problem. They can't do anything. They can't talk to anybody. No, they can't now book an accessible car. I'm really expecting a bit too much, you know. Sometimes people just expect the impossible, I think was a sort of quote from one of the agents. And after this hour and a half, me and my partners in the audience just gave up and went like, well, she's just going to drive a non-hand control car. And long story short, we have our car because the people who work in the lot were like, yes, Miss Lackmeyer, here is your hand control car. I don't know why they didn't know it existed. Anyway, it was an incredibly anxiety and stress-provoking experience. It was much more than just a waste of time. And it got me to completely rethink this presentation in a sense. And in terms of building spaces, much more, it sort of led me to think about a much more psychological way of space and of building, and of how this earthquake that happened on Thursday has really shaken me up and made me question why it is so important to me to build spaces that build in the earthquakes, and how that feels very empowering to me to make the world feel more accessible by deliberately playing with this notion. So now that I've used up almost all my time with car rental, I'm just going to go through a few more things, so back to that more portfolio talk-like thing I mentioned. This is a piece called Undress Redress, which is, I suppose, a piece where I started to very explicitly play with power between a disabled body, mine, an able body, another person, an older person, a younger person. At the time, somebody who identified very much as a woman, a person who identified very much as a man. And the premise of this piece, it's a long durational piece, so it tends to go on between 4 and 8 hours at the time. So I'm in this little space that's sort of like a cubicle with 2 big windows that you can look into. And in this particular image, I'm sitting dressed in a business suit on a white table in the middle of the space. And there's a very tall man, slightly grayish hair, with a green suit standing in front of me, looking at me. And to the left, there's a pile of clothing that is identical to the clothing that I'm wearing. And the premise of this piece is that, not visible in this picture, but there are chairs either side of this table in the middle. And I start out seated, fully dressed in one of these chairs. And at the time of his choosing, this man comes in, he picks me up, he lifts me up onto the table, and he slowly and meticulously starts to undress me until I'm fully naked. And then he will pile another pile of clothes, and he will start to redress me from this pile, which then leads to the middle part of this, where I lie naked on the table before he starts dressing me again. Then he'll pick me up and put me down on a seat on the opposite end, leave, return at the time of his choosing. And of course, this piece feels very much like this man in his suit is in control. But what really interested me in this is that play that I was paying this man. I was telling him exactly what to do. I was telling him to take control of me. And so there's a discomfort in the audience, or every time I perform this, of this small body being taken advantage of, when it then actually flips around to the idea of who is this man. And this isn't one, this man could be any man. I've performed this piece around the world, and there have been a lot of men whose names I don't even remember. I just know people that checks were written to, who were asked to turn up in suits and do stuff. I mean, they were all perfectly nice, so I don't... Anyway. This is another piece that played very much with the environment and control and taking control of the environment. It's called One Morning in May, very much because it took place in one morning in May. It's a piece, it takes place in a very specific area of London. That is very, I crawled, let's say, where shall we start with that? I crawled for a mile from a very poor area of London. At the time, it was considered the most deprived area in Europe, to the city of London, which is just a mile away, which is obviously where all the banks live, one of the richest places in the world. And a physical mile is all that divides it. And so I decided to put on this extremely expensive, lovely business suit and crawl on my hands and knees from one to the other, which took 7.5 hours on a very hot day, with all the interactions with people that came along the way, the people who ignored me, the people who told me to lick the floor, bitch, the kind people who offered me water, and sort of everything in between. And I mean, this image is a 2012 phone cameras were not great, so this was taken on a phone. It's a very blurry image of my body crawling just out of view, and behind me there's a lot of people waiting by a bus stop, mostly not looking at me. Then this next picture is of me just crawling past a clothing shop, which is a very London, very much part of this area, lots of fabric shops. This is towards the end, so I'm pretty exhausted at this stage. This place that you're looking at now, it's called cherophobia, which translates to the fear of happiness. This piece is in a theater in Berlin, as in this particular shot. I've done it in a number of places. It's a piece where my body gets tied up in a Japanese bondage harness based on shibari, very roughly, so that I'm completely restricted and cannot move. And then my body gets lifted by 20,000 helium balloons into the air, which restricts me even further. And all the control over my body and all my bodily function is left with my assistants that obviously I pay and tell to tie me up and string me up and catheterize me and feed me and give me drinks and control how I work. So this is just another shot where you can see from a little more distance. This is at the Sydney Opera House after liftoff. So what you see there is a cloud, sort of slightly boxy cloud of the 20,000 balloons in a huge auditorium with sort of my tiny strum body hanging from the bottom of this big structure. And the last one I'd like to talk to you about is, I guess, one that I understand the least because it's a piece I've only shown once, and due to COVID I couldn't perform myself. So this is a lovely woman called Tamara who performed this for me in Germany. It is called Stay a Little Longer, or How Did We Get Here? It was a piece informed, I guess, very much by the loneliness of the pandemic and by how that shifted power plays between disabled and non-disabled people and redivided the world very, very starkly between who can feel safe from the particles and who cannot feel safe from the particles. So in this piece, there is in this case, a female body, but it should really be me, a me body, sitting in a box wearing a sand-colored suit, as in a very simple suit. It's almost like pajamas, with the same sand-colored material wrapped around the head. And there's an intermittent sandstorm in there. So in this image, you see the sandstorm having settled, and there's almost dunes that have blown up against their hand. But there's sand coming down the entire time. And in intervals between 5 minutes and about half an hour, there's a sandstorm that blows it all up. And people could look in through a window from the outside to observe this lonely human. And they could come and visit one by one and spend silent time with this person. And there's in this image now, it's very much similar to the first image, this person sitting there in the sand, but there's now a person in a flowery dress with a black face mask and goggles looking at the performer. I guess the reason why I'm a lot more descriptive about this piece is because I think, not having performed it myself, I find it harder to describe what the felt sense of it is, what the embodied sense of it is. And it's hopefully a piece that will grow and continue. But I wanted to keep talking about it because I think sometimes there's something interesting about talking about pieces that aren't resolved. Okay, thank you. No.
Testing, testing. There we are. Hey there. Glad to be here. My name is Sarah Hendren. Thanks, Emily, for the introductions, and I'm glad to moderate some of my most admired creative practitioners and artists of the last several years. I'm a white middle-aged woman with dark hair down to my shoulders, and I'm wearing a black sweatshirt and black pants. And again, welcome to all of you. I have some questions prepared for our panelists to create some discussion between and among us about the work that we've seen just now. And then, of course, we'll open it up for your questions as well. Do we have a mechanism for online questions, Emily? Sorry? For the live. Okay, great. So do prepare your questions as you like. But let me just begin by using my favorite prosthesis, which are my reading glasses. Each of you makes work, bodies of work, and we can talk about the range within each body of work we've seen. But each of you has made work in the last decade that shows the fit of the body to the world as more absurd, more humorous, more productively strange, I would say, than is usually framed in popular imagination. Even stranger than saying, does the body fit or not fit? No, there's a third and fourth and fifth proposal that I think is on offer here in the work that you've made. So can you talk about, each of you, your relationship to absurdity and humor in how one or more ideas comes to life? Because humor, of course, is levity and oxygen and curiosity, and it also can pack the most visceral bite at the same time. It's something that I love about work of all of yours that I've admired. So anyone want to start with that, humor, absurdity, where it appears for you?
I can talk a little about that. So like a lot of my work from around like 2009, when I didn't yet consider myself an artist, was very much this kind of like, it was kind of comedic. And this is a piece that I brought to show you. And it's a long cane that I made. It's called Long Cane. And it's not super functional as a detection cane, but I used it to like, and it was at a time where I was just trying to figure out like, how does this like, this institutional symbol that I'm holding, like position me, and like what does this mean in terms of my position in my community? And I really don't know how to safely do this now. It might. But I would go on walks with this and like wave it from side to side and take up the entire sidewalk, and people would have to like jump out of my way. And it was at a time where I was feeling very frustrated with the design of the city and having to learn like my roots and always be bumping into things. So I was becoming an obstacle for others. I've also done other work where like I've replaced my cane with different things and then tried to navigate public spaces. One being a marching band that like serves as my navigation system. And it's not the most sustainable system for my access, but it's really fun. And it's also like an exchange of trust between me and a group of musicians. And in my last version of this, and this performance called Mobility Device in Vancouver, I was learning how to be in the marching band, and they were learning how to be in my performance. And they were like an anarchist marching band that does protests usually, and other things. But yeah, usually I'm just trying to, with humor, like, I don't know. I think I need to do work that includes some kind of humor just for my well-being. But also like, yeah, they're kind of fun to do. There's a lot of slapstick in my life too. Like I do like bump into things all the time, and I guess that's all maybe I'll say about that for now.
I can maybe build on that a little bit, because I think it's something that I don't think I ever made a choice in my work to use humor, but it has been really consistent in it, and so it's more been afterwards kind of reflecting back on why that's been important. But I think one of the things that comes up for me is that there's often, when I talk to non-disabled people about disability or access, there's like this super seriousness that comes out, like it's a really serious, sad, scary topic, and that's just like feels so bad to me, and just feels like such a stark contrast from like the way I live my life, from the way so many disabled people I know live their lives. And so I think that's been part of it, is like it feels like this kind of dehumanization, and that the humor can kind of bring this kind of more person-to-person feeling back into it. But I also really relate to what you said, Carmen, and what Park said in the keynote, which is like, that I think humor also is like a survival strategy, and like things are so bad sometimes, and being able to like laugh about how absurd and horrible things are can sometimes be like the relief I need. And yeah, I think about Mia Mingus talking about access intimacy as sometimes just being together in the face of inaccessibility. And I think sometimes humor is a way to like feel like, yeah, we're together in acknowledging how frustrating and ridiculous and bad things are.
Yeah, I mean, humor for me is it's an essential part of the work. And I was just thinking, I haven't actually shown you the ones that show that the most, I think, apart from the very first image. But I think it's also part of this creating a sort of funny power dynamic that I was talking about, to set something up that makes you laugh, or that makes a lot of people laugh, and then immediately stumble over their own laughter and feel uncomfortable. And it's that, which happens so often to, I think, of a lot of disabled people. They're sort of in between of laughing and discomfort. And I want to take that sort of to the next level and to the next level and to the next level, and catch audiences out in this absurd moment of falling over their own laughter. And that makes me laugh. And that's kind of why I do it.
I do think in Carophobia there is a strong absurdity.
Right.
I mean, like, for one thing, it's a fantasy that many of us have had. Like, how many balloons would it take, right? How many balloons would it take for me to be lifted by this?
20,000.
Yeah, well, it turns out 20,000 like is actually, a metric. So there's something very funny, I think, and just like levity and absurdity about having enacted that very particular experiment. And I hadn't heard the sort of bondage restriction quality of it too, but also the fear of happiness. It's, and all those colorful balloons, like that study in contrast, I think is like, yeah, really funny.
And the restraint is a really important part of that too, to come with this levity and this childhood dream of, so many people, hasn't everybody dreamt of a child floating from balloons?
Absolutely.
And then you look at the image of this person dressed in black, like restricted as the contrast. And one can't be without the other, because my body is needed to hold the balloons, and the balloons are needed to hold my body.
Yes. Yes, and I think in all these cases, Finnegan, what you said about the earnestness and the kind of mopey long face that comes over when people talk about access, perhaps especially in the built environment, people want to, in a well-intentioned way, they want to do right by saying, is this thumbs up accessible or thumbs down inaccessible? And then could we proceed in a problem-solving frame to taking the before into the after, and could our job be done? And meanwhile, I think these artists are sort of way out in front, making creative adaptation, also pointing to the difficulty, but also using humor as a tool, both to lighten the whole space of the interaction and encounter, and yet also being able to point out something really difficult underneath or alongside. It's really just really sophisticated, and I think people don't, in disability and design, they miss some of those registers, I think. Okay, let me introduce another topic then too. Some of you may know the scholar Tanya Tichkowsky, and Tichkowsky called for, in their book, Disability Space Architecture, called for a politics of wonder, that's what she says, in disability advocacy. And she's talking about forms of poetic knowledge that, quote, arise from the activity of making uncertainty out of what is certain. Making uncertainty, so cultivating and sculpting the condition of uncertainty as a kind of politics. So in other words, pulling back the seams a little bit from what we know, either from hierarchies of power or about who's in, who's out, and even again, that earnest thing of what's accessible or inaccessible. No, letting all of that actually rest a little more lightly and make uncertainty out of what is certain. And I think that productive uncertainty is something that is a spirit in all of your artworks, that indeterminacy, that unresolved. And I don't mean just in relation to disability. I mean a politics of wonder in its richest generative sense. And it's really hard to do. It's hard to achieve. So I'm wondering if that idea of a politics wed to wonder, this kind of strange alloy, does that resonate for you in any direction?
Yeah, I think it does in terms of the way I approach accessibility, and I think a lot of us do, where we're developing, like, I mean, the way I understand in my practice is that I'm producing like creative and justice-oriented models for accessibility, like, and it's iterative and it changes over time and changes with the context and the social, cultural, and political conditions at any given time. So, yeah, I think I've really been always pushing against standard access and care in the institutional context, and like towards like how do we, like what are the ways that we could be if we had a supportive space, a place that could hold disability culture in all its complexity, you know, because there's, yeah, like I think with the Vancouver Art Gallery project that I showed and you know, its previous iterations too, like the museum is not a space that can hold disability culture. It's, you know, we are there temporarily holding a space, and when we leave, you know, it's up to the museum to like figure out ways to like keep people feeling safe and welcome there. So, and I guess I just wanted to show this piece. It's from the show at the Vancouver Art Gallery. It's by Jonathan and Grant of the Curiosity Paradox. Are the words like right side up?
You got it flip. The part facing you needs to face forward, and then upside down. Yeah.
Okay, and so this is a piece called question access, standard access against access art. And Grant and Jonathan put kind of these questions to, and they wrote this piece that really like interrogates the idea of standard access, which they attach to a eugenic legacy. And I'm just gonna have people read out what these cards say, just the prompts. These are questions that they use to interrogate standard access.
What future is being dreamed?
What future is being dreamed?
Who leads?
Who leads?
This is the intro card that says question access.
Question access.
How are people treated?
How are people treated? Like standard access doesn't accommodate the, like account for this.
What is the aesthetic?
How does it feel?
What is prioritized?
Like, yes, ideas, compliance level accessibility measures are just like the bare minimum so we can enter a space. They usually like operate under like this assimilation paradigm where we're meant to like fit into or enter a non-disabled culture. When I think what we want is to be able to like be on our own terms. And
yeah. And it strikes me, Carmen, that the use of questions is inherently a wondering act, right? It is as opposed to going like, what's the width of the threshold, and have I checked the box, right? But there's like an opening, just gesture when you lead with questions. Yeah. What else? Do people feel like wedding a politics of wonder, either wedding those two together or taking a politics in the direction of wonder? Does that resonate for you?
I think the aspect, you mentioned uncertainty as well, didn't you, earlier? I think that really resonates with me as something that I think through my work I create deliberately, an uncertainty of the outcome, an uncertainty of how I will be treated. And I think that, if I'm understanding correctly what is being said, is that actually really resonates what I was talking about in creating an earthquake rather than it happening to me, to creating this power dynamic. And to very deliberately confront people with it as well, the people who confront me with it all the time.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense it resonates with me.
Yeah, and in your work, Naomi, I just feel like the uncertainty is the deliverable. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, I guess all art is prismatic. It is supposed to actually run in several directions at once. That I mean, at the risk, again, of stating the obvious, but I think it's worth saying in a panel that's on build and design and the urgency of access, you're still out there championing, like, you don't know how to read this, right? To appear as the Weeble Wobble, it's really uncomfortable because it is really unclear who's orchestrating the work. Yeah. And it's not messageful. It's not. That
is the work.
That is the work. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I just feel like, again, the earnestness that sometimes creeps in on our conversations about this obscures this other really light touch of creating uncertainty itself and suspending it, you know. Finnegan, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, when I was thinking about this question, I think there's this thing that comes up for me that's like, who's certain? Who's advocate? You know, and I think maybe that is something that is maybe more from like the design world, that there's more desire for that there. And I think, I mean, you both have already spoken to this, but I think for me, yeah, I live in so much uncertainty, and sometimes that uncertainty feels like fear, and sometimes that uncertainty can feel like wonder, and yeah, kind of trying to tune into those when they're available.
But I also think that like the conveyor belt idea is both, you said it proceeded from this dream of like being able to access, of course, in what is a kind of pragmatic way, and yet a conveyor belt also has a kind of association of the factory, you know, which plays against the idea of the bespoke singular artwork, right, coming through. So in other words, there is this kind of opening that opens, you know, on multiple planes of the uncertainty of who's getting served and what, you know, like what's being made here. Is it use? Well, sort of, right? And yet there is this other, but I also just, I mean, this leads kind of into the third question. I mean, I would say, Finnegan, that like designers do need certainty in the sense that we need a legally actionable ADA, right? From which a kind of set of standards proceeds. We do need that standardization. We ask it of engineering, we ask it of infrastructure, we ask it of design. We ask another thing of cultural expressive artifacts, right? And those things proceed in parallel, seems to me. Sometimes the utility, and what I love about your all's work is that sometimes utility bleeds into that, you know, that cultural expressive artifact and vice versa. But we are up against a kind of certainty that we want at a certain moment, you know, if we want to invoke a kind of legally actionable standard. So that leads me to this kind of tension with disability design and access. Access is important to disability rights as a rights tradition. We know this. And sometimes there's a kind of hazy blur that mixes the aims of like, yeah, baseline, strong practical access versus what we've seen here today, which is enigmatic. It's question-led. It is the unresolved quality of expressive artifacts. And we'd want to keep that, you know, the lightness and the joy and the experimentation of that alive, for sure. And I often talk about this as a dispositional difference between repair, let's say on the engineering, utilitarian, design, and certainty side of things, versus critique, which is, of course, a lot of times the language of the expressive artifact, the question asking, the kind of critical disposition of interrogating or exploring. So I guess my question is, are you interested in pragmatic design? Of course you are interested and invested in it in your daily lives, but are you interested in those concerns showing up in your work? And if so, how much? Do you want people to see them related to ADA, you know, access measures or practical?
I guess, yeah, I mean, it's hard. Like I think like to think of universal design as being like a standard. Like I really think of it as a bare minimum because, you know, where do we have spaces where we can feel safe and supported and welcome on an ongoing basis? Like it relies on the social, cultural, and political more so than the built environment in a lot of ways. And like, I mean that if like we were in decision-making positions and overrepresented in these power structures that lead to these global standards, then perhaps we would have spaces that serve us on, you know, more reliable basis. But I really think it's hard to create a norm within, like, for the disability community or within certain impairment groups even, because a norm within disability culture and disability experiences a diversity of positions, diversity of perspectives, and embodiments and learning styles, some of which we don't have words for yet because we haven't had the space to discover them. So yeah, I think really that, you know, the space that I want to be part of and make and kind of like find is where like we are setting our own terms. We are like, you know, supporting each other and like realizing what it is we need to feel like, yeah, like a sense of agency or self-determination. And really, this is a response to my like a lot of time in hospital, and really running up against the barriers of the medical system, but also ideas of like institutional care and how, you know, how can you deliver the care that someone needs through infrastructure? And I don't know, like I just think that's it's almost like a, for me, yeah, it's a hard, like when that's the point or like the end goal, like it's very limiting. It's yeah.
Can you repeat the question?
To what degree is accessible, like practical access, a subject in your work?
Okay. I think it isn't. I think I'm very much as a human and as a person very interested in access, like for my own sake and of course for everybody else. But I think it is actually a deliberate choice in my work to go against that too. I have definitely made work that, you know, by ADA standards would probably not be classed as accessible. And I quite like playing with that to create work that I couldn't go and view myself. I mean, that's some of my older installation-based work more than my performance-based work, but I found it quite fascinating that once it's finished, I've excluded myself from my own work. I think within my work, as I've said already, I think what's more interesting to me is that a psychological, emotional aspect of access, which is, of course, grounded in physical access. But I think often gets overlooked, and I sort of like throwing that at people with my work.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the same. Like, it's really interesting the way you often go as far away from the pole. I mean, in a way, it's like a two-way refracted mirror or something about where the access piece is like buried there. But
Definitely.
Yeah. Finnegan, what about you?
I think my interest in practical access came about through my desire to connect with other disabled people. And I think I, in my life, have benefited so much from the work of other disabled artists and writers and thinkers, and to be part of a kind of dialogue and refraction and reflection among disabled people is that I often say that I think of the primary audience for my work as other disabled people. And I think for me, because so many exhibition venues are so inaccessible, I started thinking about, okay, well, how can I try to create the conditions so that the people that I want to experience the work can experience it, and thinking about how the work itself kind of has these branches and tentacles out that start to touch and change the space and protocols around it. Yeah. But I think I definitely agree with what Carmen was saying, which is that I don't, the kind of replication or standardization I find very confusing, and I don't envy the people who have to do that. I think the moments where I have felt most access are moments that often are very temporary, and I think it, and slippery. And yeah, and I think actually, I mean, going back to your question, also I think a lot of times in my work, I'm trying to find objects or installations that can do both of those things simultaneously, that can offer something concretely in terms of access, but are also, through the offering of that access, are also calling attention to the absence of that, or the way that it could feel, or the way it doesn't feel, or the way, and so that, I think that's often kind of the place that I'm trying to situate the work.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And I think of, there's an artist who came through these very halls, Krzysztof Wodiczko, who many people will know, who trained as an industrial designer, but presented his work as art. And he talked about scandalous functionalism. So it does, like in the bench case, it actually does this very clever thing of like, look, I'm going to add literal pragmatic seating to your space, but I'm also going to not let you have resolved the problem. I am going to, in the big lettering and the typeface and everything, like the funniness of it and the kind of casual, studied casualness of it, is to say this is an unacceptable condition in general. So I have solved the load-bearing issue of providing the seating, but it is a temporary microtopia, and it will go away, but it will have shed a light on this thing. So that's where I do think like there's a particular genius of utility and access as a language for what is ultimately an artwork, right? And I think for me, that it's not just semantics, it's really interesting to think about the different affordances of those things, while not canceling out the very, again, engineering, infrastructure, policy, economics of access, full stop, the kind of daily